go through some of them. They're all quite different. So I think we'll start with Avril, if we can. Could you put your question to Subhuti, Avril?
Yeah, we were reflecting on your talk about the building a strong foundation, and I guess we wanted some tips, if possible, on whilst we're building our strong foundation and integrating the transcendental into that foundation. How can we make sure that we're not so focused on the foundation that we're not seeing the transcendental or the others and joining them together into an integrated person?
I'm not really entirely clear what your the contrast you're making.
Well, I think we can get so caught in thinking that we're building a strong foundation for practice that we can easily miss integrating the transcendental into that.
So when you talk about building a strong foundation, you're meaning specifically these four reflections?
Yeah.
I see. So you're wondering what the connection is between these four reflections and, well, what you're referring to as the transcendental. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I see what you mean. I suppose that the way in which the practices are formulated, they imply going for refuge, if you see what I mean. So at the back of it all, there has to be some awareness of the Dhamma, yeah? So that you're not merely reflecting on well, for instance, to reflect on the precious opportunity that this human life affords us. That itself implies that you know what you can use it for. Do you see what I mean? So it's already presupposed that you've got some degree of going for refuge. You've got maybe provisional going for refuge. So these reflections strengthen that, so that the point is that there's already a context. Do you see what I mean? That what naturally happens, I'd say in my own experience, is that when I touch on the areas that these four reflections are concerned with, naturally I start to think more in terms of what transcends the conditioned dimension. Okay. You see what I mean? It happens quite naturally. But what is important is that you've already got at least some broad glimpse of the whole path, and you've already got some provisional going for refuge. And maybe that did need drawing out, so it's useful for you to mention that. You know, I wouldn't get people to do these reflections who'd never engage with Buddhism, because, well, they might just end up with a kind of nihilism. That they could seem quite depressing, even. Well,
that's right.
Yes, but for a start, yes, if you're reflecting on the nature of this human body and it's the opportunities it affords you, that must be against the background of knowing what those opportunities would be, even if you're not strongly motivated towards them. Of course, well, death, there's no point in reflecting on death unless you've got some sense of what might transcend death, what the Buddha spoke of as the amara, the undying. There's no point you can't reflect on karma unless you really know what karma means. But you know that karma is not just, you know, nemesis. It's not the punishment of your evil deeds. It's the possibility of complete freedom. The spiral path, if you like, which is driven by karma, at least in its initial stages, and the unsatisfactoriness of of conditioned existence is merely a recipe for nihilism and either self-indulgence or suicide, unless you've got some sense that there is an unconditioned, which is possible to. When you let go of the conditioned, the unconditioned opens up for you, to use a rather stark contrast. Yeah?
Yes.
So, yeah, no, well pointed out. It's necessary to already have some preliminary going for refuge. I wouldn't introduce these in your beginner's class. You know, and even I think one would use them a little advisedly in other contexts, because if people are, you know, wrestling with nihilism, it might not help them to reflect on these. You might need more to emphasize faith.
Yeah.
So you need to be sitting in front of the shrine when you do them. Let's put it like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
And I
you.
should just say something I forgot to mention earlier, that the Tibetan tradition that from which we derive these four mainly stresses that they're not just preliminaries. That it's essentially, if you really do understand what they are, they can take you all the way to enlightenment. But yeah, it's good that you mentioned that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Subhuti. We've got another question. Arta Priya from my group I was in with. Has a question.
Oh dear.
Oh yeah, another public preceptor.
Well, in a way, Subhuti, thank you very much for your talk. You answered my question just now,
Okay.
because I was wondering about whether the four reflections are something that would be good for just ordinary human beings to think about, because we live in a very materialistic society, and the four reflections point to a more significant perspective on what it is to be a human being.
Yeah.
I remember when we were sitting around, my dad died last September, and my sisters, who are not religious, the significance of his death and the preciousness of us being there together stirred them in some way, in a kind of positive way. And I wondered in a way whether they were naturally reflecting on some of the mind turning. Whether you've got anything to say on that?
Yes, I think, as I've already mentioned, that the essential reflections arise quite naturally, and the formulated reflections are simply a way of drawing those out and deepening them. But yes, when I answered Avril and said that I thought a certain caution was necessary, what I was thinking of is that people are so embedded in materialistic outlook on things and see this world as so much what is real, that you need to be a little aware of the person and not just lay the four reflections on them. But if, as probably does happen quite naturally and spontaneously amongst people, if people do start responding, especially in the context of death, in a more sort of faithful way, even as faith without a name, then, well, there's something to draw out there. So I think that for us as Buddhists, in our relations with people who are not Buddhists, we need to be aware of those moments when people are up against the existential situation. And most people, if they are at that situation, will have some little glimpse through the crack, as it were. It's as if the reality, conventional reality, presents itself in such a well-articulated and smooth and convincing way. Most of the time we're taken in by it. But every now and again the cracks appear, death being one of those moments. And depends whether people are focused on the crack, as it were, on what's through the crack. And so you need to be conscious of that. Have people got some degree of faithful response? But yeah, I think you'll probably find most people have at certain occasions. But I would be very cautious about how you rolled them out as specific reflections. Yeah. But you're right. I think you don't have to be a Buddhist to have these sort of reflections and thoughts. I could say that of myself, that, you know, I described having had these experiences as a young man when I'd left Christianity, and it was these reflections came to me, but I had some intuition, nameless intuition of something more. And when I came across the Dhamma, it simply gave an expression, a very articulate and adequate, more than adequate expression to those intuitions So I think those intuitions are, as it were, available to everybody. Yeah. So I think I'm broadly agreeing with you and endorsing what you're saying. Yeah.
Thank you, Subhuti.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. That's wonderful. And could we, Lee, from your group, your question?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, hi, Subhuti. Thanks.
Lee.
Hi there. Thanks a lot for your talk. I found it really inspirational, and there's a great deal in there. You kind of touched on my question at the end there, so I'm going to try and just slightly kind of twist it maybe. Okay. You spoke about Christianity and existentialism. You were exploring those when you were younger. You were indeed a Christian when you were growing up, but they didn't answer the question of kind of what's this kit for. An amazing question I find myself asking after a great meditation or an excellent film or something. So I wondered, to what degree did your kind of Buddhist practice, allow you to finally answer that question, which you did touch on at the end there, but how do you think that was kind of sped up by you embracing Buddhism, answering that question?
Well, I suppose that it was because the Buddhism provided me with an intelligible goal, which did not require credulity, if you see what I mean. It didn't ask me to believe things that I didn't know. It drew upon my actual experience and provided me with a more fully articulated expression of it, if that makes sense. So yes, I say that I had this sort of intuition, which I could best put in terms of there has to be more. There has to be more. This is not all there is. There must be more. That was a very strong feeling for me. Sometimes inspired by the ingestion of certain substances and so on. But there's a sort of sense there's something more, but completely inarticulate, maybe best expressed in some literature and poetry and so on. But I didn't really know what it was, where to find it. I studied philosophy, but it was at the worst phase of analytical philosophy. A.J. Ayer, for those who are familiar with the history of philosophy, was the presiding god of our course. This is the 1960s. It was really, really dull. It was all about the meaning of words, which I'm very grateful for, because I'm a bit more careful about the meaning of words now. But no upward gaze, and most inspired by the figure of Socrates, who seemed to represent the knowledge of some higher reality. But there's nothing I could practice there. So then when I came across Buddhism, it's all just immediately apparent to me, this is what I've been intuiting and what I've been seeking. That the encounter with the story of the Buddha, it's more like an encounter with the man himself, if you see what I mean. I could immediately sense this is what I want. This is what I'm seeking. And so Buddhism gave sort of open public expression to an inner, inchoate, unformulated feeling, intuition. That's the way it seemed to me. Bhante talked about this, didn't there? Sort of personal myth and public myth. You have there's a sense of an inner myth, something you're living for, something that your life is about, something that gives your life meaning and purpose, but you don't know what it is. You just know there's something, or there should be something. And then you hear in the Dhamma, especially as expressed by a genius of a presentation like Sangharakshita, you hear that your own deepest feelings given open expression so clearly, so articulately. And that's what I experienced.
Thank you.
Such a relief when you hear that. It's as if the whole world settles into a sort of shape, has an orientation.
Great. Thank you very much. Could I ask Harshprabha to formulate his question?
Oh my goodness, not Harshaprabha.
I know. Don't worry, this one won't be embarrassing.
Well, don't forget, if you embarrass me, I can embarrass you.
I know. And I thought I was beyond being embarrassed, but now I think about it,
Mutually assured destruction.
Okay.
Anyway, ask your question without further heckling.
This was from the group. So you may have answered already, Subhuti. What is the practice of putting the 4 reminders into our daily lives? Yeah. And it could be, is there even a practice going by what you've already said?
Yeah. Yes, well, I think if you're reflecting on these 4 with sufficient earnestness and with sufficient sense of their relevance, you'll find that they are presented to you in your daily experience. You know, there will be points in your life when you just think, what am I doing? No, why am I engaged in this conversation? Why am I watching this film? It doesn't mean that it always has to be serious and so forth, but that you know, too much of meaninglessness is just a sort of insult to one's existence. So the more you've got these phrases in your mind, the more they will be evoked by your experience. You know, from time to time, you'll just think, I'm going to die. Why am I engaged in this? And then you'll think, well, is this action actually activating the principle of karma in the right direction? Is it actually guiding my life in the right direction? And then finally, yes, you know, is the pursuit of this objective, this goal, really still based on the belief that conditioned existence can be rearranged so that it completely suits me always and forever? So do you see what I mean? Once you've got these phrases, these reflections really turning in your mind, they're naturally provoked by circumstance. That's my experience. And they naturally come back to you. And they then have an effect upon how you act. For instance, you begin to withdraw from things that you really feel are, you know, not worthy of your human existence, that can't carry the weight of your energy, and that are not going anywhere for you or anybody else. As I say, this does not mean that you don't have fun and so forth, but it shouldn't be merely distraction. For me, that's a big thing. You know, am I just looking at the news again for distraction? Why do I need to know the latest doings of the wretched Mr. Trump or whatever it may be, to speak topically, you know, whatever it may be? Why do I need to know it again for the 4th time today? Is this really necessary to, you know, fulfill the purpose of this? I nearly said God-given body, but of course, this karma-given body, this body that I've gained through my past actions. My humanity in the past has produced this humanity in the present. And am I really right now, by doing this, making good use of it? Sometimes there's not a lot you can do about it because the sort of compulsion is there and so forth, but the reflection gradually turns the direction. So I would say, in my own personal experience, they're very pertinent and very, as I say, they're sort of provocative. They provoke you. You bump up against them, and they challenge you.
Thank you very much, Subhuti.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
So I'd say there's a warning. If you don't want to be provoked and challenged, leave the retreat right now before you get the 4 ones to engage with. They're going to shake you up. Your life will not be quite the same. You'll have to make a lot of effort for it to be the same. I'm joking, but not joking.
Thank you. Great.
Great. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. We've got a few more questions, Subhuti.
Good.
So Diasara's group, we've got a question from them,
Good.
which I hope he's going to.
Oh, hi, Subhuti.
Hello, Diasara.
Thanks for your input. In our group, it turned out all four of us had worked in, were working or have worked in the care sector.
Oh, yes.
And so a general question around, on the one hand, knowing that you can't, you know, completely rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic on the one hand, but also not falling into passivity and that kind of thing.
Yes.
So I think the question was in that general direction, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So I suppose that is a risk, isn't it, of if we get very well, you know, if we're overwhelmed with contemplations as to the mess that is samsara, we can go into passivity.
Sure. Yeah. 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 Good. Yeah. Nice question. Yeah. Usually, of course, well, you could say that the four mind turnings are of the nature of renunciation. They tend to take you in the direction of renunciation.
Yeah.
And in the Indo-Tibetan tradition that these practices come from, great renunciation is always paired with great compassion. So that you know, that comes out more fully when you move on to the Mula Yogas, because after going for refuge, you move on to the development of bodhicitta. You realize that your going for refuge must be with everybody else. So it's quite interesting in the passage from Samyutta Nikaya that I quoted to you, which has those 5 reflections on old age, sickness, death, the inevitability of parting, and the importance of karma, the significance of karma.
Yeah.
You first of all contemplate those in relation to yourself. So that overcomes, of course, intoxication of youth, intoxication of health, intoxication of life, and it overcomes attachment, and it generates a stronger confidence in karma. But then you reflect that everybody is subject to these same conditions, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's as if you then you have to say, well, everybody has a precious body. Everybody is going to die. Everybody is subject to karma. Everybody lives in this unsatisfactory realm. So that then you transform your great renunciation into great compassion.
Yeah.
So yes, you'd always you in the great tradition that we're talking about. This is just one part. We've already corrected that by saying, of course, it's in the context of a vision of transcendence, but you'd also have to say it's in a context of bodhicitta. It's in the context of trying to live as a bodhisattva. So that's assumed. You're trying to be a bodhisattva, trying to become a Buddha.
Correct.
Yeah. So that and I think that if you're in the care work, you're doing care work, it is an extraordinary opportunity for these reflections in the context of compassion, because presumably you're caring for people who well, need caring for, because they can't care for themselves because of life, because of the fundamental nature of life. And I think it's a very, very important opportunity to reflect on that, but also to reflect on it compassionately, to think, well, you know, I'm in this situation, they're in this situation, how can I help them? And of course, I'm sure you find this, that in relating to the people you have to care for, you'll find there are these cracks in their own experience, which you have to gently step through, if you like. But you're not dogmatically, not with a formula, but just gently help them to face their real experience. I saw this with my brother who died in a, well, didn't die there, but anyway, he was in a hospice, and the staff were superlative. They were Christian, but they never ever, you know, used Christianity, as it were, if the person wasn't a Christian. They just used humanity. And they really helped the people who are dying in a most extraordinary way, a way that still is with me, with the ability to be absolutely straightforward. You're going to die. And at the same time, so wise in helping people to connect with something that was greater than that. They were able to find the faith in people in a completely undogmatic way. So I'm sure in the caring professions, you have so many opportunities for that. I remember Bante saying he thought that it would be a very good thing if everybody worked, all order members at least, and no doubt beyond that, worked for some period of time in any situation where they're encountering people dying or dead, a crematoria, or even being a janitor in a hospice or a hospital where people are dying. Because he thought it was a very, very important spiritual practice, not just because it makes you think and therefore commits you to your practice more, but it also awakens more compassion. So it's great that a number of people connected with the centre are in that world.
Thanks very much. Yeah. Thanks very much, Subhuti. Yeah.
Thank you, Dayasara. Thank you for your reply, Subhuti. That's great. We're moving through our questions now. So Swadeepa has a couple of questions, I think.
Okay, so we talked quite a bit at the start of our discussion in our group about that original inspiration you were talking about.
Yeah.
And it was quite common for that to be an encounter with a person.
Oh.
A particular person with particular qualities caught our attention and seemed to be particularly meaningful and seemed to point to a different way of being.
Right.
Maybe there was some restlessness. So I think we'd be interested to know if there was a similar experience. We heard about you exploring different religions. Was there a personal encounter that sort of caught your eye and drew you towards the Dharma rather than something else?
Oh dear. Yes, I can sort of think of a moment that was absolutely decisive for me. And forgive the 60s references. Some of you are old enough to remember them. But I used to go round to a friend we used to smoke dope together, and he lived in a rooming house around the corner from me, and I went round there one time, and he said that there's a guy just moved into the block. The house, and I'd like you to meet him. And yeah, he's got some really good hash. So we went down, and I can remember his name now, Ron, and he was from San Francisco. He was a true San Francisco hippie. He really was the absolute real thing. And he rolled up. We smoked, and it was particularly strong. And what was very, very unusual was that most of us, when we sat together to smoke, we would listen to music. Music was the big thing, really. And so we'd sit there listening to Velvet Underground or Dylan or whatever, Pink Floyd. The real Pink Floyd was Syd Barrett, not after that. He'd sort of get carried away by the music. But Ron just sat in silence, and it sat very, very calmly. I suppose I would now say meditatively, and it really struck me. So I asked him, "Why don't you listen to music while you're smoking?" And he said, "Well, I find music distracts me," which blew me away. And yeah, he just sat there. And sitting with him in that mood, a very, very attractive girlfriend he had with him too, absolute typical Californian beauty. And he himself was a very good looking guy, a long dark hair. And they were really the beautiful people. But he just sat there in silence, little bit of conversation, not much. And I suppose it's probably the first time I'd really just sat. And by the grace of the great god marijuana, I sort of floated into, I suppose, what you could call was a dhyanic experience, but it was something more than dhyanic. It had some touch of something else to it. And afterwards, oh no, he gave me a book. He gave me a book, which is quite a famous one by Evelyn Underhill called Mysticism. And I opened the book at random, and there was a page that said, there was a phrase that leapt out at me: the mind is not a mirror, it cannot reflect. I had no idea what it meant. And even now, I don't really know what she was getting at. And I've never been able to find it. I've got the book, but I've not been able to find it. Maybe it wasn't really there. But for some reason, what it provoked in me was the sense of mind as something greater than experience itself. And it also awakened in me the idea that religion was not just Christianity, that all religion was not like Christianity. So yeah, thanks to Ron from San Francisco, who is a very important seminal figure. I've thought about him for ages, but you asked. And it just sort of turned me into a different way of being. And really, I suppose after that, the most significant figure was Bhante, when I encountered him, and encountered, you know, though I didn't think of it like that, those same qualities, but to a much higher degree, and of course unaided by artificial stimulants. There you are. You did ask. It's evident. You're of a certain age. It all has to go back to there, doesn't it?
Yeah. More than I bargained for. That's very interesting.
I don't know what happened to Ron. He left shortly afterwards.
Yeah, right.
I was raided by the police, and I noticed that they had my notebook, and they took down all my telephone numbers. And I noticed there was one for Ron, which was his number in San Francisco. Unfortunately, I don't still have it.
All right, maybe that's
Thanks.
the title of your memoirs. All thanks to Ron.
That's all thanks to Ron.
Thank you.
You had another question, Swadeepa. Do you want to ask that one too? About
Okay, well, I could do. Are there others waiting to ask them?
No.
Okay.
That will be the last question, I think.
Right.
Oh, okay, well. So we decided this was quite a sweeping question that would probably be the subject for another retreat. So we're hoping to invite you back.
Okay.
Anyway, so when we were talking about the Mula yogas, we got onto that. A number of us seem to have quite connections to these figures.
Oh.
And the mysterious question is, where did these figures come from? Because obviously there's no mention of anything like that in the Pali Canon, and yet hundreds of years later, these strange and mysterious and multicolored figures appear that inspire such a lot of engagement and devotion. And you know, where do they come from?
So you're talking about the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Is that specifically what you're talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's not really easy to say where they did emerge. There's a long background. We know that the Buddha occupied a pre-modern world in which, for him, spirits and nature forces were realities. The Pali Canon is full of them. So already they occupied a world that was much more multi-layered, which many different realms of reality were available. And the Buddha is said to have had access quite freely at will to all these different dimensions. That's part of his the facility of a Buddha. So we must think of that. That already there's this capacity to reach beyond the merely material realm, and a lot I could say about that. Then we see some instances in the Pali Canon of the Buddha's appearing to people when he's not physically present. The most famous one that in our order we know of is is Pingia. Comes from the Sutta Nipata, from the Pariyaya Vagga. Pingia is a very elderly Shramana who lives in what is now Telangana state on the Krishna River, and Godavari River, and he can't go to see the Buddha. So people say to him, look, why don't you go to see the Buddha? Because you're so devoted to him, why don't you go to see him? He said, I don't need to. I just think of the Buddha and he's there. And he sings the Buddha's praises. And the Buddha actually gives him a teaching. So you have the beginnings of a sense of the Buddha as transcending the material realm. And the Buddha is said to have the capacity to appear at will, anywhere he wants, just as a strong man stretching out his right arm or bends his right arm back, he disappears from this place and reappears in that place. So already you've got in the early ages of the Buddhist tradition the idea that there are realities beyond this one, and that the Buddha can appear out of those realities within this dimension. Yes, so that idea progressed. You got then the idea of the bodhisattvas. Well, you got the idea of the bodhisattva insofar as the Buddha himself was a bodhisattva in previous lives and before his enlightenment. And you got the idea that there are people following this bodhisattva path in many different dimensions, because the tradition said that there were many different world systems. So there were bodhisattvas following the paramitas in many, many different world systems. So then you think you can actually have access to them. If you as it were, turn your mind to them, they will come present. And the Buddha explicitly says that what the mind attends to, that you will become. So if you turn your mind to something, that, as it were, emerges. A part of the background, the principle of karma. So gradually, at some point, we don't know exactly when, these bodhisattvas began to have a form. The earliest seems to have been Manjushri. His figure is known, I think, from the early centuries of the Common Era. I can't remember when, first, second, third century, we find images of Manjushri. About the same time, a little bit later, you find images of Avalokiteshvara. And then Vajrapani begins to appear as a bodhisattva. Originally, he was a yaksha who appears in the Pali Canon. But gradually, you get these figures appearing, emerging out of, you could say, the cultural consciousness in the context of this idea of many, many different dimensions, and the Buddha as transcending those dimensions, and of multiple lives through which the career of a bodhisattva is pursued. So they appeared. They clearly were deeply inspiring to people who felt they were realities, not just nice images. They felt that if you said the mantra of Manjushri, Manjushri would come present. Actually, it's true, but it's difficult for us to think of that. It's difficult for us to understand that. But actually, the reality that Manjushri embodies is accessible to us. There is, as it were, some kind of stream of consciousness, stream of energy with which we can connect if we have a sufficient confidence, and which we can draw on to lift ourselves up into the same dimension, same realm. So yes, they emerged in Buddhist history in India. They spread throughout the Mahayana Buddhist world. They were also present in Sri Lanka. There's a famous image of Tara, isn't there, in the British Museum, which was found in Sri Lanka. Very beautiful one. But Theravada was ruthlessly fundamentalist, if you see what I mean, and suppressed this. I've seen it even in Burma, in Myanmar, in Bagan. I've seen a Mahayana temple full of these figures, even a Vajrayana temple. So gradually Theravada sort of extirpated them, and that produced problems of its own for them, which they resolved by worshipping the old gods, but that's another story. Anyway, I don't know whether I've said enough, but there's the picture you get, there's that Buddhists, ancient Buddhists, had a sense of multiple realities occupied by beings appropriate to each reality, and that within those different dimensions, there were beings who may have originally been humans, either on this planet or on another world system, who were still pursuing their bodhisattva aspiration, and who made themselves available to us. So it's difficult to argue all this in a current prevailing materialism, but I'd invite everybody to reflect and recognize that there's more to things than is dreamt of in our philosophy, that material reality is not reality. It's only a tiny slice of reality that we happen to occupy in a particularly vigorous way right now. But we neglect the fact that there are other realities that press upon us, impinge upon us, and that are accessible to us for our own benefit, if we only could open ourselves up to them. So yes, that's the larger context of it. I just mentioned, because it's so interesting, I read recently a scholarly article on the origin of the figure of Avalokiteshvara, which suggests that the figure of Avalokiteshvara has its origins in the story of the Bodhisattva Sumedha. Do you remember the Buddha in a previous life took the Bodhisattva vow under the Buddha Dipankara, who's in our refuge tree, and the imagery of Sumedha is exactly the imagery of Avalokiteshvara, specifically Padmatapani Avalokiteshvara. And you see images of Sumedha carrying a bunch of lotuses, which he got from a Brahmin maiden who wouldn't give them to him until he promised to marry her in the next life. But that's another story. Anyway, he took these and offered them to Dipankara. And that, according to this scholar, is possibly the origin of the Bodhisattva Padmapani Avalokiteshvara. And then he suggests that the name Avalokiteshvara, the one who looks down in compassion, implied, originates with the idea of the Buddha, after his enlightenment, looking at the whole world as a pool of lotuses in different stages of evolution. So he sort of says that the figure of Avalokiteshvara encompasses the Buddha's own bodhisattva career from its beginning to its end, but then it took on a sort of psychic life of its own. Maybe that's a bit reductive. What I think is that these images are produced from our own cultures, which connect with realities, energies that transcend our own immediate experience. But these archetypes that we conjure out of our own cultural experience, our own unconscious, if you like, collective unconscious, Jungian type collective unconscious, they sort of connect with realities that go beyond the dualism of our normal experience, and they become therefore sort of lightning conductors for that transcendent experience. So I packed a lot of thought into a very few words, but broadly and briefly, that's my understanding of what we're dealing with. And you know, if you're able to drop your materialism, which is quite hard, because materialism is the greatest religion the world has ever known, with its sacrament of consumerism. Consumerism is the practice of materialism. Materialism is the philosophy. Consumerism is the ritual, as it were. And it's so good. You always get a better iPad, and so on. So we're locked into this strong conviction that material reality is it. And if we want to engage with forces that can really benefit us, that can really support us and carry us along and carry us ultimately beyond our self-attachment to selflessness, well, we have to let go of that materialism. So I think that you could almost add a fifth reflection, which would be on something like, this material reality is not the whole of reality, and there are worlds beyond this one. Hamlet-like, there's more than dreamt of in our philosophy. You remember when Encounters the Ghost, and I think this is very, very important for us who are trying to be Buddhists. To be a Buddhist is actually to open up to these other realms, not in a credulous way, but in a way of being open to them, allowing their possibility, and watching what happens to us when we begin to let go of that realm and reality. I mean, that's why I am grateful to having had my hippie phase, even though I would not recommend anybody else to, drop acid or smoke dope. I don't think it's a good idea, but it was part of my journey because it opened me to other realities. I knew trees were conscious. I was entered into communication with trees, and I know even now that was real, and I sensed presences that were beyond those that were materially accessible. So I hope I haven't kind of sounded too weird. You'll probably explain it away by all the drugs I've ingested, but I didn't actually ingest many. But I think it's really important that when we approach Buddhism, we recognize Buddhism is challenging materialism. It's saying materialism is a narrow, false way of understanding reality, and that reality is much more mysterious and much more vast.
That's a big answer.
Yeah, well, it's a big question, as you said. Yeah. I hope that's sort of helpful in some way.
That was fascinating. That was really,
yeah.
really
It's very interesting because in India, our movement has emerged out of Dr. Ambedkar's work. And Dr. Ambedkar's work was a challenge to the Hindu caste system. And I think one can definitely say that, the Hindu caste system, it's embedded in Hinduism, the caste system. So that the very strong desire to move away from, and even, well, move away is far too weak a word, to absolutely reject that whole world. And what that meant was a lot of the early Buddhists became thoroughgoing rationalists, and they were unwilling to accept another life. They were unwilling to accept rebirth. They're certainly unwilling to accept bodhisattvas. We have to be very careful how we talk about that, because it looks like the old Hindu gods and so forth. But they sort of cut themselves off from that. They have the figure of Dr. Ambedkar, who inspires in them huge devotion. But of course, he was a this world figure. So there's been a sort of slow process of trying to find out how to open up to this larger realm that is so essential to Buddhism without feeding back into Hindu superstition and therefore casteism. Of course, there's things in Hinduism that are a little bit more than that, but it's very easy to slip back into that. That's probably what happened to Buddhism in the late Middle Ages. Here we have the opposite problem, that we start from a position of nihilistic materialism. Maybe not everybody I'm talking to here, but we start from that position. It's much more difficult for us to accept these multiple dimensions. I better stop before I just go on.
Science
Go
has
on.
moved in that direction, of course. now.
I'm
Isn't
sorry?
it? Science is moving towards the multiple
Science is
dimension.
moving in that direction. Yes, science is certainly moving beyond 19th century sort of mechanical materialism.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. I read a very, very interesting book by a Jim Tucker. I don't know whether you've come across him, called Return to Life. He is still the head of the parapsychology unit of West Virginia University, following on from the great investigator George Stevenson, who's a serious, respectable academic psychologists who were open to the possibility that there were other realms of or other experiences that were not generally recognized, and had a lot of trouble with it. But they have a department which is very successful. They collected, for instance, huge numbers of reports from children who remembered past lives, and some of them are really, really interesting. So you're dealing with hardcore scientists who believe in evidence-based theory and so on. Anyway, the book is very interesting, and it recounts a number of stories of this kind. But at the end of it, he has a long sort of speculative passage, chapter, taking off from a Buddhist scholar, actually, a scholar, Wallace, who did translate a lot of Tibetan Buddhist texts. But he takes off from him and kind of provides a fusion of quantum theory with Yogacara doctrine, which sort of explains rebirth. So I found it very interesting that he was able to do that, and I've shown that to a number of scientists who, whilst not being entirely convinced, said they couldn't fault the science, as it were, but the steps that were taken beyond that, they were not yet prepared to go. But yes, very, very interesting the way in which science could open up. But let's see.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. That's all our questions, Subhuti.
Jolly good.
Thank you very much for answering them, and very, very interesting answers. We've got a lot of material to reflect on this afternoon and over the coming days. In our exploration of the four mind turning reflection. So I think it's going to be good. We're going to have more groups where we can explore these ideas as well coming up. So just finally, just say thank you again, Subhuti, for being with us. And I think you, as I said, you've left us with something great, and we're very grateful for you for coming along, taking time out. I know you've got a very busy schedule. And taking time out to come and be with us. So it's a wonderful thing that maybe this is something great coming out of this lockdown, actually, is that you can come into our world, into our little world in Ipswich, and enjoy our company and become part of our Ipswich Sangha, which is lovely that you've been able to do this and agreed to do this. So I'm very grateful. I'm sure everybody else here on this this retreat is also very grateful. Yeah.
Well, it's Andy's punya karma that brought me here. I don't know why. I just responded to the way he asked me, and I'm very glad indeed to come to Ipswich, even if only virtually. And I must say, it doesn't seem to me it's a little world. I see the number of order members you have there, and a fine body of people attending. So it's pretty plain the Dhamma is very much alive in Ipswich, and well, may it only thrive and grow.